Here on the Film Board, we have covered quite a variety of great page-to-screen adaptations over the years, from superheroes like Christopher Nolan's The Dark Knight Rises, based on stories like Nightfall and The Dark Knight Returns,
to horror and sci-fi like Max Brooks' World War Z and Hiroshi Sakazuraka's All You Need Is Kill, which became one of our favorites, Edge of Tomorrow, with Tom Cruise and Emily Blunt.
And who could forget Andy Weir's stranded astronaut adventure, The Martian, or Dave Eggers' tech thriller, The Circle.
Supposedly so much better than the movie.
We've also explored Stephen King epics like The Dark Tower and It, biopics like Damien Chazelle's First Man,
and sweeping sagas like Denis Villeneuve's take on Frank Herbert's Dune.
And don't forget Martin Scorsese's Killers of the Flower Moon, based on David Grann's nonfiction book about the 1920s murders of the Osage Nation. I just finished the book, and it's fantastic.
It's always fascinating to look at the source material, and we often do as the book lovers we are. For those of you out there who love to do the same, head to thenextreel.com/originals to find all of our past episodes and dive deeper into these adapted stories.
And it's not just stories. We've included things like the video games Uncharted and Detective Pikachu.
That's right. Thenextreel.com/originals is your one-stop shop for in-depth looks at the sources for cinematic adaptations that we have discussed. Every purchase you make supports the Film Board and the Next Reel's family of shows.
So what are you waiting for? Head to thenextreel.com/originals and get your next read today. I've been podcasting since 2006. In that time, I've tried countless hosting platforms, but in August 2022, we switched to Transistor to power all of our shows here at True Story FM, and it's been a game changer.
I love the Transistor allows unlimited podcasts and storage without extra charges. We can publish so much content, and we do. If you want to start up a podcast, do yourself a favor and host your show on Transistor.
With their one-click publishing, you can get your new show onto all the major podcast directories effortlessly.
And their website builder lets you quickly build custom sites for each show.
The detailed analytics are invaluable too. You can access all kinds of listener data anytime.
Oh, and the versatile players allow you to embed episodes anywhere to reach new listeners. Plus, the team behind Transistor is super responsive and keeps making the platform even better.
After using countless hosting services over 15 plus years, Transistor has been, hands down, the best podcast partner for us.
If you want a hosting platform to take all the worry out of getting your podcast out into the world, go to thenextreel.com/transistor and check it out.
Support our show and support your own show by going to thenextreel.com/transistor. Start growing your podcast today. In the year of the Imperium's grace, on the cusp of yet another turning of the cosmic wheel, the Film Board gathers beneath the twin moons of discourse and reflection. A sandworm of colossal narrative has surfaced from the sands of imagination, a creation that weaves the very fabric of visual storytelling into a tapestry rich with the hues of Arrakis itself. We acolytes of screen and scholars of saga explore the dunes and sieges of Denis Villeneuve's vision, where the ancient prophecies of Frank Herbert's words have found new life amidst the stars. This is Dune, Part 2.
It's breathtaking. When you see sand here, imagine water. If you dive in, you can't reach the bottom.
You dive in.
Yes, it's called swimming.
I don't believe you.
In the shadows of Arrakis lie many secrets. But the darkest of them all may remain. The end of House Atreides.
Your father didn't believe in revenge.
What if Paul Atreides were still alive?
Have you ever had a dream about your first ride?
Don't try to impress anyone. You're brave, we all know that. Be simple. Be direct. Nothing fancy.
I understand.
We are the chroniclers of this Dune epic. Let the conversation begin as timeless as Shai Hulud's endless journey through the deep sands. I am Pete Wright and bring you the conclave with film borders. Na Baron Steve Sarmento.
I will make him spicy!
And Mahdi Matthew Fox.
Look, anytime Zendaya gets a white boy to eat spicy food, I'm in for it. So
I will say that this was supposed to be a stacked film board, but I don't know if you've heard, there's a thing going around called the Sick, and our own Sandwriter Kyle Olson and Gaius Tommy Metz III bowed out literally just minutes before the show. They're very ill, so we raise our glass of spit water to them. As we move into this. This was a really interesting thing as we set up this conversation, because Steve, you posted today in Discord that as it happened, the last time a Dune movie came out, it was us plus Ocean talking about that movie. So we had the opportunity to hear past selves discuss what we wanted in today's movie, which was a little bit bonkers. I feel like the Ghost of Christmas Future.
Yes.
Do you want to open with a bit of a reflection about what we said?
Knowing that it was two parts, there was a lot of speculation about what part two would hold. And what was very interesting was we were recording this shortly after release, so they hadn't even locked in for sure that there was a part two. They hadn't officially announced that. So we're like, we sure hope we get this part two, and this is what we sure hope to see. And I wondered if part two was going to impact my, review of part one after seeing part two. So I did rewatch part one, last night, part two, yes. Well, I watched whichever day this is recording. Prior to watching part two, I watched part one like 12 hours prior. So it's all fresh in my mind. But, and that had been the first time I'd watched Dune part one since we talked about it, long ago in 2021, I believe it was. But it was so pleasant to get back in the groove of the sand, in the grit, in the desert. But listening to that conversation again reminded me so much of what I loved about the first one, and really primed me for this conversation of what we were going to dig into this time as part two takes it into a different direction.
Yeah, I really find it fascinating that we're having, I think, this conversation about that movie, and spoiler alert, we're going to have the same conversation about Dune Part 3 at the end of this. I think I listened to it too, and I think what's so fascinating about it is just how well it held up and how split we were. I think two of us, I believe, Matthew, you were in the crew of, I can't think about this as a single movie. I have to think about this after I have seen part two. So I toss to you, does it hold up as a single movie?
it absolutely does. And I think primarily because it holds up as an adaptation of the book. And we'll get more into this, but I there are just two kind of things I want to say about this. The book is very dry and very, like, it is not aged well in a lot of ways. If you think the homoeroticism of the Harkonnens is a little over the top, oh boy, it's so much worse in the movies. And not that homoeroticism is bad, but homoeroticism equals bad guy is bad, is what I'm saying. So much worse in the book.
Yeah.
But, I think the fundamental idea here is, do you think Paul is a hero? Because if you read the book or watch the movie and think Paul is a hero, you've come away with the wrong idea. Mm-hmm. And for example, in the David Lynch version, which is a great, fun movie, but Paul is very much the hero. And the book is very much a critique of that and is meant to be that. And I was really nervous in the first part. I was like, are they meaning it to be the critique that the book is? And I think the movie did a very good job of doing that. I think there's one major change they did which I think actually should be an object lesson in how to adapt things from book to movie that we'll talk about, to help make the point that the protagonist is not the hero. But yeah, overall, I was very pleased. This was very much the movie that I wanted it to be.
Oh, I'm so glad. I'm so glad because I have heard criticism about the adaptation because I think in this movie there are more changes than there were in the first movie adaptation, and I need some help. I know, Matthew, you've been reading the book, and Steve, when did you say the last time was you read the book?
I've read it. So I read the first half prior to Dune Part 1 and then finished the second half shortly thereafter. So it's been a couple of years, but it's still fresh enough to really, because as I watched to say, wait a second, this isn't.
Yeah.
They made some
There's
changes
some things
here.
that I fully expected that were just not in the second half of the movie. I think one of the things that is interesting about this one is it's a little bit of the season 5-ish of Breaking Bad, because we actually get the turn of our protagonist into I think ultimately the antagonist, and I'm curious to see how that conversation goes. This is the story. It picks up straight away from the first movie, and he is just had his heroic fight in the sand, and they're now wrapping up the body of Jameis, and I made it way too hard. And they're wrapping him up to take his water, and they're going off to their siege and picking it up right there. And it really does, I think, pretty quickly become much more of a Chani movie, and I think that was a big problem we had with the first one too. That Chani was a vision, Chani was a dream, Chani was Zendaya with not a lot to do, and this movie, Zendaya has a lot to do, and I think centering this second half of the movie with the Fremen makes for a much more interesting, plot-driven story that I think was looser in the first one. Fair assessment?
Yeah, and can I give my theory here about the way what I meant about the changes that I think actually make it more true? It's going to be jumping. As I said, in the book, because you're getting so many people's point of views, I think it's easier to read the idea that Paul is wrong, that Paul is becoming locked in more and more to this religious fanaticism, that the Bene Gesserit are, really problematic and it's propaganda and all that kind of stuff. I think that's very hard to show on screen. And so what I think this movie did is it said, we're going to make one major change that will actually allow it to be truer to the spirit of the book, which is that I think they realized that on screen, you need to have a protagonist to root for. And I was thinking about this because I was reading something on interviews with Martin Scorsese talking about that maybe Coppola, I'm sorry, but they were deeply surprised that people were rooting for the Corleones. That this is supposed to be a movie about bad people. The big change they make is that in the book, Chani is totally supportive of him, whereas in the movie, she's the one who sees that he's going down this messianic path, and that's really problematic, that he's an outsider, that he's a colonizer, that his Bene Gesserit mother has seeded all this. And I think by giving that to us, it gives us in the audience someone to root for, that we need on screen in a way we don't need on the page, and thus allows us to be again. Because I think if she's just as supportive of him, we might walk away being like, "Oh, I guess Paul's the protagonist. We're supposed to root for him," without realizing the whole movie is supposed to be about why he's not the hero.
That's a really interesting take. I didn't expect you to go that direction. For me, I think the twist was just how much is spent giving Paul the opportunity to say, I'm not going south. If I go south, bad things happen. I know bad things will happen if I follow this path. And everyone else keeps telling him he has to go south. I think the piece that was really, I thought, beautiful to me in this sort of the third act was him accepting the fact that he really didn't have a choice. He had to go. He had to pick up this mantle. And critically, he knew it. He knew when he had to make that choice. He knew when he had to tell Florence Pugh that she would be his bride. He knew all those things were wrong because they set it up in the first 2 acts of the movie, right? They set it up when he was wandering the desert. And by the time he gets it and makes that turn and sets the holy wars ablaze, we realize that he's Heisenberg. Is that a fair assessment too? I want to make sure I didn't read something bonkers into the movie.
No, I think that's very true. I think it's that, and that's also directly driven from the book.
Yeah.
The whole going south thing, not as much, but him seeing the trap and resisting it. I think what's different in the book is in the movie is that Chani is able to step back and say, you only need to do, you are falling into a trap, but it's one that your mother and her people made.
Right.
Yeah.
And that I want to destroy the whole trap instead of you choosing to fall into it.
Yeah, right. They gave her a new sense of agency that I don't think she had in the book. If my memory is a little bit.
No, they pretty much sideline her in the book to be like, now you're a mom. I mean, that was one of the big changes is like, let's just sideline her. Basically, let's saddle her with a kid, and that's just gonna, it really takes her out. Whereas, by shortening that time frame, by not playing that aspect of that latter part of the book out, it really keeps things tight and tense between Paul and Chani, and we get that dynamic tension going on. But that slowly builds. I mean, even to some comic effect, right? Because at least in my theater, there was a sort of a rumbling chuckle in that moment where it's, he's like, no, I'm not the guy. See, he's so humble. He's not. He says he's not the guy, so he's clearly the guy. And everybody just sort of like laughs because it's like, yeah, we're getting into this, really kind of uncomfortable thing of like the fanaticism that will drive people to see the things that they want to see. In those things. So it really leans into that whole the prophecy piece and everything. And going back to our reviews of part 1, Matthew, that was one of the things you really wanted to see the story dig into more, was that whole aspect. And I think Chani comes right out and says it in this one of like, yeah, they've they're manipulating us. The way to control people is to tell them a prophecy, right? And then have that come true. It's like this great thing. So we just see that really explicitly, played out for us in this film. So
right. Yeah. I mean, to kind of tie the two things we're saying, Pete, together, because I think they fit very well. I think you're right that we are supposed to believe that Paul believes he absolutely has to do this. And I think what the book makes clear, but it would be harder to do on screen, and so they use Chani, is the one who can see that whether or not he has to, he's still wrong to do it. Because I think without Chani, the audience might walk out thinking, wow, Paul was such a brave hero, willing to accept the thing he had to do for the right thing. And that's so not the point.
Yeah.
But I think without Chani, it would be harder to see that.
Absolutely.
I will also say, Steve, when you talked about the chuckle in my audience was when, and granted, there's so much politics. It's not a lot. I don't think it's going to be a classic love triangle, which I'm glad for because it's much more about politics. But the chuckle in my audience was when, Chani is there with him and Paul says, oh, and by the way, Emperor, I'm going to marry your daughter. And they cut to a look on Chani's face. And I was like, oh, that's her in Euphoria right there.
Yeah.
The teenage drama with all the love triangles. And I was like, that's the look. That's the look.
That's the one. That's fair.
All right.
That's fair. I could see a little Euphoria.
Yeah.
They did drip it in. I want to dig in a little bit on the messianic pieces of this, because here I have, here we are, and you both as students of scripture, I'm really curious your take on how the book, how the movie handled this beyond what we're talking about with Paul's specific turn, but how the movie handles the general, I would say, cultural aesthetic of the Messiah story, because it feels like 2024's Messiah story is different than Herbert's. Is that fair?
Well, I think there's two important things. One is that I think for many of us, when we hear the word Messiah, we think Christianity and Jesus Christ. Right. And it's important to understand that all three of the Abrahamic religions, to some extent or another, have a very strong idea of Messiah. And in Judaism, a lot of Jewish people have moved away from it. Some sects of Judaism still very much believe the Messiah hasn't come, but will come eventually. And Islam also has a very strong idea of Messiah. And so I do think that in many ways, Herbert was making this more about Islamic ideas of Messiah than Christian ones,
Yeah.
to the point where, I mean, there's a lot of like, the words are directly taken from Arabic and from Islam. Like here we talk about crusade and the book is jihad. I think Herbert was a lot more revolutionary in the 1960s to be as critical of organized religion and Abrahamic faiths and prophecy of a way of outsiders to mobilize indigenous people. I think today as a culture, we're much more on that side. But I'm not, it felt fairly true to the adaptation of it in this.
Well, to the point that I mean, I think you may have made the point I didn't think I was about to make, but wanted to, which is that Herbert was ahead of his time enough that when we see a movie that so overtly points out areas to be critical about, prophecy of outsider coming in to rally the people, and have so many characters who are so overtly using that the tools of propaganda to demonstrate the power of mobilizing people. I think that's maybe Herbert was writing 2024's Messiah complex all along.
Well, as I said on our discussion of part one, I really believe art has a way of speaking its truth into the world and reflecting the truth that is in the world of why do certain movies get made at certain times, and looking at what this film might have to say about religious fanaticism or people buying into specific beliefs. Because we do have this, what I find interesting is when we have that moment, with the water of life, when it's when Paul's mother is going in for that ritual, and we've got Chani saying, oh well, the people of the north, like this is just she's poisoning herself, but the people in the south are you're more like fundamental, like diehard religious ones. And it's like, hey, we're praying over here, quit your joking around. It's that schism between the two, between the north and the south, of aspects of any culture where you'll have that separation of those that are perhaps more in the contemporary culture, where there is, you have to be part of the world, you have to be part of a global economy, versus those that are fundamental in the South, where there is nobody else living there, right? That's why the Harkonnens don't go down there. They're like, it's inhabitable. That's where the fundamentalists are. They have separated themselves out and built their own little kind of separate from any other influence. And to look at what that says about how cultures behave, the interaction between the two, the role that this messianic character plays of do we really unify these things? I think what Herbert did with this whole thing of bringing in the marriage with the the empire and all of that, and casting Chani aside, it's really, I don't know how you can see Paul as the hero, but you see him as like the dude that's got to do what he has to do for political reasons, right? I mean, you think it's this love story. It's like, no, he's doing what he feels that he needs to do to fulfill his father's vision, right? Of it's all about the power. So I think the interplay between those aspects of political power and leveraging people of faith and all of that is very much still accurate and alive in America today.
Yeah, I think it's such a good point. And one thing I really love about what you're just saying then, Steve, is that it shows us that the Fremen are not a monovocal culture who are all the same and all feel the same. I think a lot of certainly the David Lynch portrayal of them, but also just often the way in either movies or in real life that we often look at cultures that we think of as other, as exotic, as different, and often that means indigenous, is that they all feel the same way. And so seeing these that different parts of not just that Zendaya is an outcast, but that and part of it's generational, that a lot of young people are just like, that's granddad with his religion, but also that different regions have very different feelings on this.
That's interesting, because I think the movie actually does a really good job of demonstrating exactly what you both are talking about with the experience of the Fremen. The Harkonnen are the monolithic bad guy. They're the empire, right? I mean, I don't get a sense that they're anything but a monoculture. politically
I mean,
motivated.
they're quite literally monochromatic.
Yeah, exactly.
They're mono.
Exactly.
Yes.
Do you know what they have though that is the best? They have the best fireworks, right? If we
Oh
could
my
have more
gosh.
splashing in the sky,
Yes.
that was extraordinary. I loved it.
I will say it's going to be interesting, I think, to decide how many movies this series is going to be. Because I would actually say that this is part 2 takes place in 2 parts, interrupted by a short movie in the middle called Let's Meet the Nabaron, which is a black and white movie.
Yeah.
Yes.
And I thought, though, that making it like the filmmaking, whatever, they explain it that there's a black sun.
Yes.
Which, if there are any physicists out there, astrophysicists, this sounds like pure nonsense, and it's not in the book as far as I can tell. At least not in the first book. It might be later. But it's so beautiful that you don't care. And it's perfect. And to me, my take on the Harkonnen is that I think what Herbert was trying to do, and I think what this movie captures, is say, I'm not going to tell you that there's pure good and pure evil.
Mm-hmm.
I am going to give you that there's pure evil, but that the people who think they're good fighting actually are the really morally complex ones, most of whom are not as good as they think. So that, yeah, there is a malevolent force of darkness in the world called our Harkonnens, who are just laughable and ridiculous and terrifying.
Mm-hmm.
But then everyone else is like, it's what we do to fight evil that makes us like all so much more complex.
Which is so interesting because, I mean, you look at what is happening with the Fremen and with the remaining Atreides, that we have the voices of innocence that are already compromised in utero, right? I thought this was an interesting choice because for me, the grand memory of so much of Dune was the portrayal of Paul's sister.
Yeah.
And the sister is never born in this take of Dune. The sister is already overtaken or unleashed by the power of the spice and the water of life, that it becomes a sort of sentient political will while still being born by her mother. And I thought that was a really interesting choice, to take the voice of innocence, as innocent as you can possibly have it, right? The voice of an unborn child, and make it a political activist.
That whole piece is, and they do get into that in the book a little bit more. They do touch on that as Lady Jessica goes into that, and she says basically she's going to be taking on basically all the memories of all the Reverend Mothers before her. And so assuming that is now not only passed to her, but to the unborn child, of what all that wisdom is and knowledge, but somehow filtered, because there's clearly some insight. But again, there is that lack of worldly experience of living life, of almost the purest form, not just innocence, but just intellectual knowledge abstracted from, I have nothing, I'm protected, right? I'm not putting my life on the line. I'm not out there present in the world. I can be this, like, I guess, reverse puppet master, right? She can speak to what's going on. She can hear everything that's going on, which I found is a fascinating way to have that character still have influence in the story without us having to go through all of the, let's kick the can down the road, a year to have this child born, all of that, to keep things tight and do that. That was a, really nice way to handle that. And was an interesting aspect of the character, that to have such a strong presence without actually ever really being present on the screen.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And such a great exercise in narrative economy.
Yes.
Right. To your point, we didn't have any jump forwards in time. I'm sorry, Matthew.
Yeah. Like, I think it really worked because, as we're saying, in the book, it's over 3 years or so.
Yeah.
Here, it's over 6 months. But if it is over 3 years, again, just how do you put this on screen? You now need to have a 2-year-old who is saying all this. And that's either going to be some weird, like, talking baby movie CGI that's going to really, really uncomfortable, or in David Lynch's, they just make it like a 6-year-old girl dressed all in black. It's a nightmare child. It's very creepy. She is very creepy. But yeah, I thought this worked really well. And predictably, if you are in certain corners of the internet, either on the pro or anti side, people have decided to make this the newest debate over all the IVF stuff that's happening right now. To be clear, both the book and the movie say, like, this is not a statement about a normal embryo or fetus. This is a statement about, super god-powered, drunk the blood. So,
Right.
Yeah.
but
Right.
yeah, no, I thought it was creepy and uncomfortable, but in a way that really, this really just has me thinking a lot about how do you translate on screen to book, and I just don't think a world-savvy 2-year-old is going to translate on screen in any recognizable way.
No, it also, we have to think about, what then happens with this ongoing conflict on the planet. While it's like we need to move time forward for this character to be born, so we're just going to put all this tension and conflict that the Harkonnens are basically wiping everybody off the face of the Northern Hemisphere. So for 2 years, like, oh, it's just status quo and nothing progresses. No, that, by removing that, keeping the timeline tight, we're able to build on that tension of there's this massive genocide that's progressing as they basically wipe and push them down to the south to we've now reached that breaking point of like, where's it going to give? And I think I can understand narratively that choice to do that, to keep that tension as you have to adapt, the elements from a book. But in a movie, the last thing I wanted was 3 years later, on the screen, because it's just, it kills the momentum, it does all those things. So I think they found a really nice way to handle that character of the sister and to keep the tension going with this conflict, to keep us on the edge of our seats as we're moving forward, because this is part one, set all the pieces on the board. This is, everything starts to move and we've got the chess game being played out for us. But sorry, Matthew, not enough boardroom meetings in this one.
That was an awesome callback. So many missed boardroom opportunities.
I was wondering when I was going to bring this up. I tried hard not to roll my eyes too visibly when you mentioned the quote about the director not liking dialogue.
But you failed. Let me just tell you.
I'm sure I did.
You totally failed. Yeah.
I love this movie a lot more, I think in part because there's a lot more dialogue and a lot more of it is political boardrooms and things like that. And while still being a visually stunning masterpiece. And again, that's a stylistic perspective of mine. I'm not saying that the director's wrong. I'm just saying it's not the stuff that I love necessarily. But I will say I thought so much of this was so good in terms of all of that. My one big complaint: there are some actors who are so very much that actor that I no longer think they can just slip into a role and stop being that actor. And
That's
so when in the middle of this very deep, very intense movie, all of a sudden, instead of an emperor, there's Christopher Walken on screen. Who's just like, he's shuffling and I can't do his voice at all, but it's just like, this is supposed to be the most powerful man in the galaxy. This is supposed to be a man who is a god emperor. And maybe it's because of just everything I know about Christopher Walken, but also I thought his performance, he just felt like an old guy who's kind of like, I don't know if I can hold on to power anymore. What am I going to do?
I had this stuck up my,
I don't know why Christopher Walken becomes an old Jewish man from Brooklyn in my mind. But,
you really don't know why.
Everything about him felt so wrong. But the rest of it, I love the board meetings. I love the court.
I'm going to push back on that a little bit. Go for it. Because I'm curious as to, because as I recall in the book, the Emperor is not very present in the book, as I recall. So I really see that maybe that choice of picking someone like Christopher Walken who can, play that as a little bit more fragile, as you say, sort of shuffling around, as the Harkonnens seeing this as their opportunity, as the Emperor is in decline. So he's got a daughter. He doesn't have a male heir, coming in. So is this play into that choice of casting of, if we have somebody that is strong and just charismatic and virile and like, I am the emperor, that introduces a different element that to me, right now I can see why the houses might want to go to war to see who's going to step into that role, because he's somebody that can easily get toppled. So I think that's sort of the way I'm looking at that, of Paul can make this play because the emperor isn't in a position of strength anymore. He doesn't have that. So that's sort of the way I'm looking at it. But I agree. There are plenty of other actors that wouldn't be as, it just pulls you out for a second. It's like, oh, we've done this great job of putting the audience in this other time, in this other planet. And Christopher Walken just can be a bit of a strike to no fault of his own. It's just he's one of those actors that is whatever part he plays, he's Christopher Walken. Yeah.
And I will say, Brian Blake in our comments totally agrees with you. Preach Steve. And I guess I think you're making a good point. I guess I just mean, for me, Walken is it's not just that he's older and fragile and vulnerable, it's that he's comedically doing that. And instead of so I saw it as a comedic portrayal of weakness instead of a and that
I can see that. I
think that point is well made, because I don't know that Walken at this point in his career, and he's a stereotype of himself, right? He's a caricature of himself. I don't believe he's trying to play comic. I believe that he comes off as comic because of the baggage that he drags behind him.
Yes.
I'm not sure that I necessarily believe that he fathered Florence Pugh. I just there are questions, but it also brings to mind, to me, one of the things that I think is a bit of a trick of this movie is that it took a very dense bit of source material, and it actually presented a political movie in a way that I think was easy to distill on screen and not overcomplicate it, right? This is a movie where I was able to keep track of all of the characters and all of the motivations, and none of them felt overdone. And I say that right now because I think Florence Pugh's character might have been dancing on the razor's edge of that in another movie, in another director's hands. It might have been a shadow manipulator to the point of confusion in this story. But what they did by holding back a lot of, I think, that manipulative, the manipulative angles here, was allow the final line of, I guess he started the Holy Wars, the whole, and, that is, I think, a really interesting way to set up what could have been, or what might still be a much more complicated political story in the form of Messiah, where we have all of the houses fighting each other. Right now, we just have a boardroom, right? Like, we have a house, a wasted house, and the emperor, and we can keep track of all the pieces on the board, right? Like, that I think is a sort of bit of narrative wizardry in this movie that helps it make sense and still be beautiful and approachable.
No, it is, because there's so much that happens in that final scene where we've got the final duel, we've got the challenge, we've got the proposal, we've got Lady Jessica just asserting her dominance by telling the big Reverend Mother, like, basically back off. So you've got this complete shift in power that happens all in this, and it's very clear to track who those players are and who's rising to power and who's now falling, what that transition is. Yeah, because the other houses are out there, and we get a little bit, through like a telephone of like, oh, they're doing this, they're not doing that, because it is, that will become a factor, but really to keep it as simple as those pieces, and that we can track it all. Because I think that's the important piece, that we can't be confused as to who's doing what and why. I could easily track all of that. And there's multiple story threads going on with that, especially when you start to just quickly, introduce things like, oh yeah, by the way, we're going to twist this a little bit and let you know that Jessica is Baron Harkonnen's daughter. Right. So we've got all of that piece that gets woven in there. More, it's just really, complicating things with that, which is done. I think they've managed to, how do you stay faithful to the source material, make it coherent for a viewer that sat through, 2 hours and 40 minutes of this, to be engaged and tracking with it and not walk away confused as to what happened, why it's happened, and where the story is likely leading to next. All in that last scene is that's a lot of heavy lifting for a writer.
And I think it's also where the changes from the book are actually really useful, because I think Herbert was a brilliant writer of his time in many, many ways, and many of his stuff is incredibly timeless. And I know this will come as a great shock to maybe both of you and to our listeners, although Steve has read it before. A science fiction novel written by a man in the 1960s does not have the best characterizations of women that I have ever read on page.
Wait, what?
I know,
What?
I know. Shocking. Shocking.
I'm shocked there's gambling going on in this establishment.
Exactly. Brian actually pointed out that in the book, she's kind of Chani, the triangle that you might think between Chani and Princess Irulan and Paul is kind of presented as, well, he's got the native, concubine, but he still gets to marry the rich white woman.
Right.
I think the way that Chani breaks away from Paul, so that there's never a sense of like I think Paul is pretty clear that he has lost Chani by the time that he suggests that he should marry her, and that Chani does not leave. I mean, that's maybe the final. It is the ceremony with the emperor of him becoming emperor, not him wanting to marry this other woman. That is why, because I think it would have looked really awful if it had been done a different way. But just I think with Erdogan in general, I think they give them a lot more characterization than they do in the book, which is
yeah.
The one thing that I had a problem with, and maybe this is just my face blindness, and it was very obvious to you guys, I did find it confusing when we get introduced to Princess Erdogan, who is a pale, blonde, Bene Gesserit woman, and then not long after it, a pale, blonde, Bene Gesserit woman goes to the Harkonnens to seduce Fade.
Right.
And granted, it's in black and white, so that might be part of the confusion. I at first thought it was Erdogan doing that until I had to go and look up some stuff online and be like, oh no, it was not. Was I the only one who was a little confused by that?
We're talking about Leia Seydoux as Margot Fenring at this point. I wasn't confused, but I think it might be only I am a legit fan of both of them in separate works, and so I was tracking them because one, I was surprised. I was surprised that Leia Seydoux was in this movie. Frankly, I didn't see it coming because she wasn't in the last one, and I'd heard that Pugh was in this movie, and I'm glad they saved her for this movie. But really, this for me, it was just tracking faces that I already of people that I already liked.
That's really fair. And like I said, I'm not a face person, so
right, yeah.
I think we speaking of another bit of twisty face play, and specifically faces that have been smoothed to the point of our inability to recognize them. Austin Butler is in this movie with, oh my God, no eyebrows. And I think this was, true to that sequence we were talking about, just the idea of simplifying so many things that could have been complicated. When Paul says at their fight, hello, cousin.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, I'd heard that. All of that still made sense to me. And the whole role of Austin Butler as the sociopath, who was, for me, in this movie, an absolute high point.
Yes.
I really loved Austin Butler in this movie. And I loved Dave Bautista in the last movie. Dave Bautista getting bullied in this movie was a superlative delight.
So good. So good.
I would pay twice to see that.
And
what did you think of the Harkonnen brothers?
The way they just sort of introduce, Fade is basically like, well, there's this other factor. Yeah, but he's a sociopath. He's a psychopath. It's like, but the question is, can we control him? And so it's that Bene Gesserit, we're still in this for the long haul. We're playing the long game on this. I find another fascinating, sort of complicating factor in all of this of thinking that there's no guarantee that Paul is the one, right? That the prophecy may not be about him. They're still manipulating things, and knowing that Jessica is of Harkonnen blood, it's like, okay, there's clearly something in that bloodline that they think is valuable. So yes, this lunatic that they want to figure out if they could possibly control him, is that, could he be the one? Do we want the sociopath to be the one? And I just thought he played it so well. When you've got that whole arena fight, I mean, Matthew said it's like it's a separate little short film in the middle of everything that is done so well. It shifts tone, and you're just like, yeah, I'm on the ride for this. But to then to have a character come in and then hold their own amongst all these other established characters so well, and to humble the Dave Bautista, yes, there's I love that performance. I, you know, he doesn't have the Walken syndrome, right? I didn't see like, oh, well, that's just Elvis under there, right? I don't get that. It's just, this is a completely, if you hadn't told me that, I would have some face blindness there.
I just learned that now, and I loved Elvis the movie.
Yeah, exactly. I'm just like, I don't see that. He just totally buried himself in that role, and I thought it was a fabulous addition to this cast.
Go watch the first episode of Masters of the Air. He's in that too. It's extraordinary.
And again, because I didn't see this as much in Elvis, but then because I was looking at Elvis in this, like just one of the most beautiful men I've ever seen in my life, and the monochromatic worked so well. And yes, I was a goth kid in the 80s and 90s. And so his black eyes were just like, okay.
Yeah.
And when they show him in like full color,
too.
There's one shot where you can like see the green in his eyes. I was like, no. I wanted to believe his eyes were black. But everything about it was so well done. And this idea of them being cousins, because remember, the idea was supposed to be that if Paul was a woman, then these two would have, also been mated basically to produce what they would have thought of as the one. They're cousins, quite literally. And if you think that wow, some group trying to like make all these different, this is exactly what Queen Victoria and like a lot of the other European monarchs at the time were doing, of like, okay, well, if this person marries this person and then their kid marries this other person's kid, we'll have like all these perfect alliances, and that's part of the point, is how do we make peace between the Duke and the Baron? Let's get their kids to marry. I just thought everything about it was so well done. And you're right, it was so much simpler.
Yeah.
In the book, there's so much about the rivalry between them, between Dave Bautista and Austin Baker. I mean, they're Fade and what's Ravon? Thank you, Ravon the Beast.
Ravon.
And it's this wonderful, but there's just and again, it's all incredibly homophobic, and there's a whole long plot line about how Fade sends slave boys to the Baron, including one who has a poison needle and a part on his thigh where the Baron often touches, and it's all supposed to be this like extracted lesson of the Baron teaching, kind of a Sith-like idea of like, I'm teaching you to kill me, but you're not ready yet, and I'm gonna but it's not necessary, and it would have just confused the story, and I'm kind of glad they got rid of most of it for this.
Well, you bring up the Baron. I mean, we were, I think, all enthusiasts of Skarsgård's portrayal of the Baron in the first movie, and I think they've leveled him up, particularly because of his arc of power in this movie. I bought the overall trajectory of the Emperor as being this avatar of power all the way up to you die like a pig, and giving the death to Paul, and really demonstrating that when he isn't floating with his anti-gravity bubbles, he is a slug. He crawls across the floor like a slug. And I thought that was a really diabolical bit of filmmaking that had me in its grip. Thoughts on portrayals of the Baron?
Oh, it was great. I just love that moment of he's there just crawling. It's like his entire purpose, everything that's driven him, is to get to that throne. And in his last moments, he's like making this last effort, like, can I get there? Can I just get to there? He's
nobody notice.
Right. It's like, because everything else is going around. And you see the Emperor's been pulled down over there in his throne. He's like, let me crawl up there. And it is, and I don't know, by history as well, or what Herbert's influences were. But, Matthew, as you're talking about, some of the aspects of the book, I'm looking at this as sort of like taking aspects of like Roman culture into the Harkonnens, where you have those pieces and that corruption and just absolute depravity that's in a declining empire versus, Middle Eastern cultures, and playing around with those ideas. And I think what they've done is been able to, remove some of that, aspect of the weaker parts of that. As you said, let's get rid of that homoeroticism, because I think that's, not strengthening the story. But I look at that again as like what we can learn from history, even by projecting it, whatever, 8,000 years in the future, that certain, aspects of human nature drive us to certain things. And so we will always have a character like the Baron, who is just pure greed and power, and what that does to really dehumanize a person, so that he is literally like a slug. Even from the beginning when we first see him floating, he's just got the trailing cloak. It's just like the tail. He ceased to be human in any way at all. And so I think that Skarsgård, I read that, he preferred the 8 hours of makeup to he talked about all the digital CGI stuff they had to do for Pirates of the Caribbean. He said, no, I'll take the prosthetics any day on that, even though it's 8 hours of just to be that present in that piece. And the
number of dunkings he went through, like just I thought the viscosity in that as the oils fall from his skin, I thought was, I mean, it was just so real. So real. I'm sorry, Matthew.
No, it's fine. And to me, there are two things I loved. One, just kind of pick up on what you were saying, Steve. His portrayal was so good, in part because you mentioned that like Herbert uses gayness as a way of being like, look how depraved they are. The other thing that he uses is fat phobia. Like, in the book, it is specifically because he is so ginormously fat that he has these suspensors, and so making him this like very weak, frail creature, but a slug that's like tall instead of being, rotund. It's another way of being like, look, we don't have to draw upon this punching down thing to do it. But then to me, the other thing that it hints at, which is something that is very deep in the books, and I don't think we'll ever see on screen, if not for a very long time, although it's all of a sudden very relevant. In the books, if you notice, there's never a computer that's ever used.
Oh, yeah, they totally don't. They left all of that out. They're not allowed to make a device that replicates the human brain.
They can't do AI, which talk about a very relevant story. So to have him be a person who is overly reliant on technology is very important in this work. And I like that it's like a little bit of fan service, in that but it's not, because it serves the story.
Right. Yeah.
But the other thing I thought was so great about that scene is, what is the most classic trope of the final confrontation between a hero and a villain in a story about a hero? One of them is that the hero's been driven by vengeance. I have to kill the villain. I have to kill the villain. I've beaten the villain down. The villain is broken at my feet. I can kill them. And you know what? I realize I'm the better person. I can walk away. I don't need to kill them. And that's the heroic act. And Paul has that chance and is like, nah. I'm going to stab you right in the effing throat. But yeah, it was like, to me, and there are still people who've walked out and been like, yeah, Paul's the hero. And I'm like,
no.
He killed a defenseless man.
Right.
Like, killed.
Right.
It's
driven
the
by
ultimate
vengeance.
hero trope. Yeah.
So I'm looking at Brian's comments. He was talking about Rebecca Ferguson's performance, because you look at the shift from the first one to the second film, from part one to part two, because part one is really a lot of Paul and Jessica together. And this one, they are separated for so much of the movie. They each take on their own mantle, where he's got the path that he's on and she's got her own separate path. And the transformation her character goes through, I think, is critical. And I think it's important to not overlook it, because coming back to the prophecy, she's continuing to play that out from the South. And I did read one article that, talked about her becoming the villain of the film. And I don't understand that interpretation of that, because I don't see her as being a villain. I think she's the other side of Paul, right? Again, neither of them are heroic. We can understand what their rationale is for their choices. But I thought it was a very interesting way to take that character to really show us visually. I love what they did with makeup and costuming with her, to really embed her into that culture, into that Reverend Mother role with that. And I feel like it's possible to overlook that part, but I think it's a critical part to the story that we can't, forget to think about her role with the Fremen down there.
Well, I think you're absolutely right. I think one of the things that strikes me is that she is given actually a parallel story to Paul's, right? Because she's already kind of an outsider Bene Gesserit, right? As Paul's mother, right? She's not really looked kindly upon. And what we learn in this movie is that the Bene Gesserit are not great, right? They see themselves as kind of the benevolent kind of but planners of the universe, but really they are manipulators, right? And that's the whole thing. When we get that conversation with Gaius Helen, like of course they've been planning this all along, and they have plans and B plans and C plans, and this is what they do. And I think you look at Lady Jessica, her arc is simply to accept the thing that is evil in the hand that she was given and to do her best with it, right? Like I don't believe she is a dyed-in-the-wool Bene Gesserit mother. By the end, when she
No.
uses the voice right
Right.
on Helen, that's a very powerful moment. And I will say, as an aside, I could have used more voice. I
Yeah.
love the voice,
Oh,
and
yeah.
every time someone gets smacked down with the voice, I am a very happy person. I think that's a really interesting sort of commentary on Jessica's arc. The fact that it really does mirror Paul's in the choices they sort of are forced to make.
Well, especially because they both take down the most powerful person in the universe from their perspective.
From their
Paul
perspective,
takes down the Emperor.
Yep.
She takes down the Mother Superior. And I think she has a very interesting characterization in this, because for Paul has an idealistic goal. He thinks that the oppression of the Fremen is wrong. His father felt the same way, but his father was still in the, I can free them so that they will be good to me,
Right.
And
Mhm.
in the book, Paul is very clear about, he still has that colonizer mentality of his father. I am the Duke Atreides. And in this, most of that is left out. He really just wants to help the Fremen be the Fremen, which then becomes like, then let's go take over the galaxy, which is a whole other, which is, his villain turn. But I think the thing is that, so he has this idealistic goal of how can we make things better? Jessica has had one goal since the first moment she appeared on screen in part 1: protect the people she loves. And for
Yes.
her, I think they make it very clear, she never has a thought. I don't think she cares much one way or another about who is actually ruling Arrakis, who is actually in control, what's happened to the Fremen. But at some point she realizes, okay, at first she thinks, okay, the best way to keep my family safe is to keep Duke Leto safe. That didn't work. The best way to keep my son safe is to hide as much as we can. That didn't work. Okay, I guess the best way to keep him safe is to make him the ruler of absolutely everything. So let's do that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly right. Exactly right. Yes.
And I think in that, I think she is amoral and not immoral. Because I do think there's a sense I think she will murder small children in their cribs to keep her family safe. I have no doubt about that. But I think she has no, whereas the Bene Gesserit, like you said, have a mwahaha, we're going to rule everything. I don't think she wants to rule. I think she just wants to be safe. But she'll kill small babies in their cribs to do that, So,
right, because the Bene Gesserit are very much an at what cost, like a negotiation. We're going to weigh opportunity cost for our actions, and she's at any cost kind of person. Like she will protect her family at any cost. I like that.
But she has a
I
much
like
smaller goal than they do.
Yep. Well, right up to the moment that her son becomes the leader, the Messiah, and the leader of everything. Right.
Right.
then her goal suddenly scales up.
But I don't think it does. I think the point is that it's still to keep him safe.
Yes, to keep him safe, but on such a large stage, right?
yeah.
And that's what makes I'm so interested in whatever comes of the next movie, which is I think an exploration of so many of these topics on a very big stage, as big and beautiful as this movie is, and it is giant and gorgeous. It is a small stage, right? This movie is Arrakis, and what's going on Arrakis. Everybody comes to Arrakis, and I guess we do have the middle sequence, the black and white sequence, but the stage on an interstellar scale is small. I'm curious what happens when it grows.
Do we know there's going to be a part 3? Have they been approved?
That is an incredible segue you've offered for us. Incredible. This is what I meant by having
there we go.
the same conversation as we did in 2021, because as we record this, there is no official green light of the next movie. However, this movie has outperformed the first one on opening weekend by quite a bit. So this is what I got from ComScore, estimated Sunday estimates. were, as of right now, as we record this, domestic 81 million 5, international 97 million. So right now, estimates cumulative, $178 million movie in the box office for this weekend. That is better than the first one. And I think it all but guarantees that we're going to be seeing Dune Messiah. Now, Villeneuve has said, I think I'm really done after the third one. And in fact, I've been working for 6 years on these two movies straight, and I'm ready for a break from the sun. So I think we're going to take a break, and he'll probably do something else first, but we can likely expect Dune Messiah. The way I read this article and the way I read his comments are, this finishes the Dune contributions for me. That this tells what I believe is my complete story of Dune as a director and writer. And from there, who knows what's going to happen? But as of all the rumors and all the actors have said, yeah, Denny calls, it's a yes. Zendaya says, I don't really care what it is. If he calls me, I'm going to say yes. If it's Messiah, great, we'll come back. So that's great. Too bad for guys like, this is an interesting thing only because I watched the second Aquaman movie last night. I don't know why.
I say a prayer
Come
for your
on,
soul,
guys.
my son. I'm so sorry.
Well, so this is this is what I thought was interesting, because in all the books, Duncan Idaho is listed as a character, like through the than any other character.
He comes
Duncan
back.
Idaho is there the whole time. Does he come back in Messiah?
Well, it's I forget what the name is. It's sort of like a clone of him that they have. So it's his character, and yes, but it's like a clone of him that I read. Is the only character that's like present in like a large
every single book.
all the books or whatever. Yeah.
I mean, one thing I think is important to understanding these books is that, as far as I understand, Herbert and Gene Roddenberry were very much seen as people who saw eye to eye in a lot of ways. And so, what you were saying about is he brought back from the dead? Is he a clone? In the same way that if you think about original Star Trek, there's all these episodes where the people believe that these are religious things happening, but our crew knows the scientific explanation. Him coming back is seen as it's a Messiah. They raise people from the dead. That's what you do. But also that it's a clone. And so, it's a thing.
Okay. Well, I'll buy that as a thing. And I actually thought, I think with both, I think all of these ancillary kind of support characters, right? Gurney Halleck and Duncan Idaho, I think they're really fun, and I think they were cast well. I think Brolin is great in this movie. I think he's a great character to have back, and so I'll take him. If they can find a way to bring him back for the next movie, I don't know. But I haven't read Messiah, so I need to actually read this over the next 4 or 5 years to get caught up.
I mean, that's going to be the thing about making them, is the first book is now over. That's the story we've told. Starting with the second book, they get a lot weirder. And there's even some who will tell you that the original trilogy of the 3 movies, the 3 books, is just a prequel to the real book, which is book 4. I have not read that far. I think God Emperor of Dune is the 4th one. I'm not sure. But so, there's all these scenes in the book where Paul can't tell, he's remembering conversations that he's had with his sister, and he doesn't know if they've already happened at the time of the conversation is currently happening.
As we get to wrapping up, which we need to get to wrapping up, I do want to talk about production design, effects, and direction. The movie did look really, really good. Thoughts on our expansion of Arrakis, and the fact that we get monochromatic sequences, the fact that we get worm wrestling and what riding a worm actually looks like. That was a thing that we were frustrated by in that last movie, that we didn't get quite enough of the worm riding. And this one, not only do we get to ride the worm, we caravan these worms, right? Amazing.
That was something that I was so excited to see. And the one thing that I noticed, and maybe it's just the difference in how effects are rendered now and then, but as I recall, in David Lynch's Dune, sort of they're sort of galloping along on a worm. These worms are flying along the sand. I mean, they are just. I'm like, I'm thinking, how do you get off this? Because that's like jumping off a train traveling at 100 miles an hour. These worms are just cruising through the sand, and it just created so much more excitement out of that. Of like, you get on that thing and then you just go as they're cruising through that. It just made that so much more of what I always wanted it to be and to see. So I was so thrilled, and I love the fact that they didn't need to like. We don't need to get into the mechanics of why everything has to happen the way it does and what they're doing. It's just like, just take it and we're going to go with this. We're not slowing the story down. You hook in and you hang on for your life for this ride. It was awesome.
The fact that they made suspense into that first worm ride when Paul is trying to get on the worm and is just sliding down the dune.
Yeah.
I was in a panic state. I knew he would win.
Yeah.
But I was in a sense of great anxiety because what if he didn't? He would be buried under 1,000 feet of sand, right? That's extraordinary.
Well,
I'm sorry.
Mostly buried under a worm. That would be crushing. Yeah. Like,
well, he'd be crushed the worm. yeah. First crushed, then buried. Or eaten. So very efficient. Yeah.
No, I thought it was done so well. As you said, Steve, it skipped all the mechanics, which, by the way, again, to modern ears, sound really cruel to these animals.
Yes.
So I was glad for that. But I also thought it was the parallels between his story and Chani's were so well done, and having her play the role she does without it, like, I think you can look at this without really understanding it and see Chani as a Pocahontas figure and, kind of a very racist. And I think in the book, there's some truth to that. And I think, so having her be the one who helps him learn this, helps teach him this, but then when she does it at the very end, there's the suspense of what is exactly she going to do. But I didn't have a doubt in my mind that when she wanted to get on that worm, she was going to get on that worm. And I just thought that was such a good counterpoint to his story. And yeah, everything about it was just so visually breathtaking. And and granted, this is my own, perhaps bugaboo about this style of filmmaking. What this showed me is I can really appreciate the absolute beauty without needing to stare at the beauty for 10 more seconds before someone else says something.
What an incredible power move that we get those 10 seconds on Chani's face before we cut to credits. I thought that was an incredible choice to be in a movie that is so big to end on, this extreme close up on her features as she's riding the worm, right? Or she's about to jump on the worm.
Well, yeah, I thought, we're getting another one. I mean, that's all I could take from that, because we don't get the typical the Emperor's dead. We don't have that emotional lift of we've defeated the bad guys and all is going to be right in the Empire and everything. It's there's still work to be done, and there's still things that need to be resolved, and she's got some things that she's going to work out. And
she's pissed.
Yeah, I was I loved it. Because I walked away from it was like the end of Across the Spider-Verse of I didn't know there was a part 3 coming, but the story set me up for that. And I thought I was waiting for some type of, murmuring or revolt from the audience of what, that's it. But everybody was fully on board with this is where we are. Love that decision to end the film.
It was so good. And I think more than anything, it's also now why I need someone to tell me the rest of this story, because for everything else, I know what happens when the Fremen warriors go out into the rest of the galaxy, because there's a whole series of other books that tells you exactly what happens. But this is totally off the book. So nobody has any idea what she does.
Right.
And so it's you gotta give me that story. As well as there's a humor that I'm about to praise this person incredibly without knowing how to say their name. I don't know if it's Zendaya or Zendaya, but either one, I think at this point she is solidly my favorite, and I think just the best actress of her generation, because it is just to watch her in this versus watch her be both the best girl next door, but also the utter breaking of the trope of the girl next door in the Spider-Man movies, to being every troubled teenager who either was or knew as a teenager in Euphoria. Just the incredible range of these characters and all being portrayed so perfectly. As well as I know these movies are not often going to get the acting nominations, but I think if she does not get an acting nomination in this, I will be very upset, because I think she was just so good. And you could show just those 10 seconds on her face as her clip to be like, here's what she is.
Right. She's made some interesting swings. I, as a dad of children of a certain age, I celebrate her earlier work on Step It Up on the Disney Channel. I've watched every single episode of that. And so I also know she can dance.
Oh,
it's just, we'll just say that she can dance.
But does she leave her friends behind?
Oh, jeez. Oh, gosh. All right. Did you guys catch the little, I'm assuming it's a little nod to David Lynch, a little, for lack of a better term, a Lynchian Easter egg?
There were a couple of moments I saw. What did you say?
I'm thinking of the disposal of the Baron's corpse in the desert and the ants crawling on the air.
Oh, yeah.
Yep.
Right. Problematic for one of our regular hosts.
A little blue velvet there. Yes, exactly. Yeah.
That was very good. That was a nice nod. I thought, there were a lot of really clever choices in terms of portraying these things on screen. The harvesting of water from the bodies, I thought, was really interesting and horrifying and beautiful at the same time. I thought it was lovely. We have not said the words yet. I will be the first to do it here at an hour and 10 minutes. Chalamet. Timothy Chalamet as Paul, I think he levels up in this movie. And I think it's really interesting to see how quickly he's able to go from that sort of sullen character to this character who embodies that major kind of transformation of identity and ego through the course of this movie. Because in the span of time that we get with them on screen, it's over the course of 5.5 hours or something. But over the space of his time in the movie, we get to actually see him grow. And I'm not sure I expected that. I've always thought of Timothée Chalamet as a certain kind of actor, that I knew what I was getting with him. And this second movie, I feel like I got a little bit of a different Chalamet.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think you saw how much he had changed, and how much, there was never a amount where I doubted how much he was struggling against this, and that he didn't want this, but that he did come to accept it.
Yeah, there's a big transformation from being I'm the confused teenager trying to figure out my place in the world to I'm stepping up and asserting myself and ascending to power and that leap. And for me to buy that, because that was one of my concerns when I heard he'd been cast. I'm like, okay, yeah, I can get the young Paul of like, I don't know if I'm the Messiah or not, but then to play that strength and to do that, because he's not a physically imposing, man. He's, little Timothée Chalamet. You can, Dave Bautista could just, snap him like a twig, but he was able to convey some of that strength in that final scene again, that I was impressed by that, of like, do I buy him as somebody that can rally people around him, that can be that strong leader? And he was able to get there. So I give him tremendous credit for that.
Yeah. I mean, some of the speeches he gives are just, especially because the scene in the council with the Fremen, where there's this idea of he has to, if he wants to speak on behalf of his particular group, he has to kill Stilgar to take his role.
Right. Yeah.
And he basically comes in and in many ways, this is the most messianic moment, I think. And it is one that is very recognizable to Christians, but I think also is, because again, Christianity is the only one of these three where it is fully accepted that the Messiah has happened already. But I understand that there's a lot of predictions in certainly in Judaism, but also in Islam, of that this is the kind of thing the Messiah will do. He comes in and it's like all of our, it's the line that I was thinking of from Christianity is is the law made to serve man, or is man made to serve the law? And because what he comes in and says is like, yeah, all these traditions we have, but think about, the goal is to make us as strong as possible. Stilgar is officially my leader, but if you say that for me to speak, I have to kill him, he is my right hand. I can't do this without him. Why would I do this? And he fundamentally tells them that they have to change the way they've always been doing it, and he gets them to agree with it. And that is an incredibly messianic act. And it's again framed as they're doing this because people have told them that they should do this when he comes along.
Right.
Right.
And the fact that Like I think in some ways that's the only point. That's the point of his that I probably most agree with, that he shouldn't have to kill Stilgar. And so it's just so perfectly done that it's done in that way.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, I think as we again, I'll try again as we get to wrapping this up. I think I think we have a lot to appreciate in this second Villeneuve outing across the dunes, and I really, really look forward to hearing how we rate it when we jump to Letterboxd. We're on Letterboxd. The True Story FM's family of film podcasts are all part of the Next Reel's HQ page, letterboxd.com/the Next Reel. And we are going to throw some stars at it and see where they stick. Steve, you want to go first?
Yeah, I'm going to give it a solid 4.5. I very rarely, if ever, give out 5 on a first watch of a movie. But so I'm going to give this the solid 4.5. And I really want to, even though I watched them like 12 hours apart, I think watching them together again back to back and really looking at it as the whole story, now that I know where things go, to look at the interplay across the two, I'm really looking forward to viewing this as one story. Because really, this is the thing I'm going to tell people about this movie. Like, what did I think about it? I'm like, this isn't entertainment. This is storytelling. This is the translation of a story from a printed book to a visual format. And so it's really an amazing story, very well told. This isn't, entertainment. This is top-notch storytelling in all aspects of the visual medium. So 4.5 and a big old heart from me.
Oh, 4.5 and a heart. Okay. Matthew?
So I'm not really a Letterboxd person. I probably should become so. I think probably I'm also at 4.5, maybe even like 4.9, if that's a thing, because it is so close to being there. I wanted the eyes to be bluer. Like I said, but I think there were a couple other like legit critiques we had with it. But like, to me, it is 3 things all at the same time. It is 1, a just beautiful movie and a fantastic like example of movie making and a wonderfully told story. It is 2, a very good, like, as you said, a very relevant story that does what I think is what I think religion should do and what I think good art should do. It raises difficult questions without giving easy answers. And so it forces the person experiencing it to really think and have conversations like this. And lastly, I think it's a master class in how to adapt a book for screen.
Yes.
And particularly in that, I think it did something that I think is one of the hardest things to do, which is to take a work where the protagonist is not a hero and put it on screen. Because again, look at David Lynch. David Lynch is great. It's a really fun movie, but you are rooting for Paul Atreides. And to me, that was kind of the thing I had in my head is, if I end the movie rooting for Paul Atreides, then it is not accurate to the book. And I absolutely didn't. I saw it as tragic. And I thought that was, so yeah, I would say this is 4.5 leading to 5. And going back to what I said for the first one, now that I want to watch them both together, just in one sitting, probably with some bathroom breaks because I'm getting old. But I want to watch the 2 of them together, and then I'll probably give it, like, I think the whole thing to me is a 4.5, with the original being like a 3.5.
Wow. I mean, you guys are praising the movie, and I'm still shocked at how low your reviews are, your ratings are. My goodness. Well, you know
isn't
me.
This out of 5?
It's out of 5, but I don't do half stars. And so I have no choice. The universe has proclaimed that I must give this a 5. And it is. And I gave the last one a 5. I really felt very, very strongly about it. And I think as a visual exploration of what you can do with the tools, and a reminder of just how wonderful it can be to really see the integration of practical and CG effects at used at their very best. I think this is as modern and sort of future looking as it is a throwback, and I love what they were able to do with it. My quibbles are so small. Right? My quibbles are, why didn't they keep Momoa so he wouldn't go make Aquaman? Like, I don't know. Anyway.
I probably should just give it a 5. I mean, I did say, like, I think it's absolute. We've got a long year ahead, but if this doesn't win Best Picture, I'll be amazed, because just in terms of advancing the art of movie making in a way, I think film classes are going to talk about this movie for the next
Yeah.
100 years.
Certainly more than whatever wins, because I firmly believe this movie is good enough that it won't win. Then it will be talked about much more than whatever does win. I really think so. I hope so. I hope so. I think Denis Villeneuve is now. I mean, if he wasn't already, I mean, he was, but he's a director. I'll see just everything that he does. The name drops, and I'll see it. Really, really great. Thank you both for coming and hanging out on this fair conversation. Spicy Steve Sarmento. Always great to see you and hear you talk about movies. And Matthew, the ethical panda, great to see you. And you are just crushing your other podcasts here at True Story. I mean, daily episodes right now. Oh my goodness.
I will say the fact that 8 episodes of Avatar: The Last Airbender and 3 episodes of Star Wars: The Bad Batch were released within 36 hours of each other. I had a lot of caffeine.
Yeah, you did. You're doing as I said, you're doing the Lord's work here in podcast world.
Thank you.
We really appreciate it. The shows are great, and check them out over at. You could just go to theethicalpanda.com. It'll jump you right over to the landing page for Star Wars Generations and the Superhero Ethics podcast, which Matthew helms. So, thank you everybody for downloading and listening to this show. We appreciate your time and attention. We will be back next month in some crazy mixed up universe that no one would ever possibly see coming. We're doing Alex Garland's Civil War. So, okay, gird your loins, everybody. Texas and California are uniting. Until then, meeting adjourned.
Hondo.
Stay classy, Arrakis.
Andy, according to my friend Internet, this is what Letterboxd is. Letterboxd is a global social network for grassroots film discussion and discovery. Use it as a diary to record and share your opinion about films as you watch them, or just keep track of films you've seen in the past. Showcase your favorites on your profile page.
That is a lot.
You bet it is. That's why I want you to tell our fair listeners just one thing you do with Letterboxd that has changed the way you watch movies. Let them have it.
Okay, are you ready for this?
So ready.
I love lists. As of today, I have 246 lists in my account. I use them to track the movies I watch, organize them in all sorts of different ways. I track them by hand. I clone lists from other people. I use them to plan what I'm going to be watching, all sorts of things. I love creating lists. It's a fantastic tool.
Sexiest animated characters. Andy, what is this?
We love Letterboxd, and if you're a movie lover, we are sure you will too. And when you upgrade from the free account, you will remove ads and support the great Kiwi team building this amazing service.
Just use the discount code NEXTREEL or visit thenextreel.com/letterbox to get 20% off your pro or patron membership. And it works for renewals as well.